All right, so this is chapter one. This is just the basics of where our laws come from, and it's a little bit, maybe a little bit more dry. The chapters will become more interesting. The first two chapters talk a little bit about the background and the history of our legal system in the United States. And next chapter we'll talk about the court system, how it works and how it's organized and how the different courts are integrated. And with chapter three is when we actually get into business law topics. So don't think it's all the chapters are going to be like this, right? So constitutional law, we're going to talk a lot about constitutional law a lot, because it affects our legal system all around, all the way from the Supreme Court to the little local court. Constitutional law is always present, but there are different sources. So found in texts and cases arising from federal and state constitutions. So there's a federal constitution, and every state has its own constitution as well. But nothing can go against the supreme law of the land, which is the U.S. Constitution. So a state cannot come up with a law that contradicts the supreme law of the land, which is the U.S. Constitution, right? U.S. Constitution supersedes everything else. Statutory law is laws enacted by federal and state legislatures. So there are federal statutes, which we will talk about more about when federal law applies and when state law applies in another slide. But federal laws have to be followed by everyone. State laws have to be followed by those within that state, obviously, right? Their uniform laws may be accepted or rejected by certain states, right? And then there is a uniform commercial code. This is very business related, actually, has virtually been adopted by all states. It helps when there's interstate commerce between different states, right? When you're doing business in one state, from one state to another, and the states have different laws, they refer back to the Uniform Commercial Code, which all states follow, right? So there's not going to be a lot of conflict about, well, but our laws are this or our laws are that, right? Because they all follow the Uniform Commercial Code, which we'll talk more in a future chapter. Case law and common law doctrine. So case law is when judges look at cases to see what has been done in the past, right? The rule of law announced in court decisions. So case law interprets statutes, regulations, constitutional provisions, and other case law. So basically what judges do is they look at the statutes, which is really kind of another way for laws or rules, right? Any regulations that exist within that certain case or maybe within an industry and things like that, constitutional provisions and other cases. So they look at other cases and see if there was a similar case in the past where circumstances are almost identical, and judges actually have to look at how a previous judge decided on that case, and they have to decide the same way. They can't steer away from case law. There's another word for it is precedent, right? They have to look at precedents. Because what happens if they decide differently? If every judge says, oh, I don't agree with that judge, I'm gonna decide this way. Why would that be wrong, or would that be wrong? Yes, Maria.
For different interpretation, and if I don't agree with the judge decision, I can go to other judge who might have different perception about the case. So
yes, because people have different perceptions. Laws should not be left up to interpretation, really, based on experiences and opinions, right? So if one judge made that decision, means that judge should have, and hopefully has, in 99.999 cases, followed the law, right? And not thought about what they think, oh, well, we should maybe be a little more understanding of this or that, but you have to follow the law, right? Diego?
How do judges deal with changes in societal behavior?
Very good question. There are cases when judges can move away from precedents because society has changed, how we, things do change. Technology changes. There are technological changes which actually also drive societal change. Sometimes new laws have to be put in place to deal with that, right? You know, or maybe there are other laws that didn't exist in the past, like segregation in the past was legal. But then new laws came, so all those precedents didn't matter what judges decided because now it's illegal, right? So a lot of times new laws are put in place. I mean, law doesn't change very quickly. It takes time, and it's not fluid like other topics in business, but there are changes being made, you know. Before the internet, we didn't know how to deal with, you know, trademarks, and when somebody uses your business name as a URL and all that stuff. So new laws had to be put in place because of the new technology, and again, sometimes societal changes. Gay marriage wasn't legal in the past, right? So now it's legal, so it doesn't matter what a judge decided in the past. That will not be a precedent because now a new law exists, right?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
So a new law has to be put in place for able to go away from the precedent, kind of.
Not necessarily has to be put in place, but sometimes it doesn't have to be a new law, and a judge can argue that there is a difference now, and then that becomes the new precedent.
Okay.
So there are exceptions, of course, when the judges can move away from previous cases. All right. So the next topic is equitable remedy and courts equity. So this is very important for business law because most business lawsuits are based on civil law where somebody had some losses because somebody made a mistake and they want to recover their damages, right? And recovering damages, it's done by remedy. Remedy means to enforce a right or compensate an injury to that right. So if a business and I have a business deal, I go into a contract with another business and they're going to do something for me and I'm going to pay them. And let's say I pay them, but they don't deliver what they promised to deliver. Or they, you know, and then they don't refund me my money. So I can go to the court and I have injury. It's not, injury doesn't mean physical, it could be financial injury. I had some losses, right? I want to now recover my losses and I want them to reimburse me for the losses I had. Sometimes it is physical injury or not, right? But so that's called remedy. What remedy are you seeking when you sue somebody, right? Especially in civil court, you're seeking a remedy, you want something out of it. Criminal court is different. In criminal court, somebody goes to jail or has to pay a fine, you know, if it's not a crime, if it's less than a crime, right? Yeah. So in the remedies at law, in the old King's Court, remedies were restricted to damages in either money or property, but what else are you gonna reimburse somebody? You're either gonna give them their money back or you're gonna deliver the goods, right? Kind of like, you can look at it that way, right? Remedies and equity based on justice and fair dealings. You can also add specific performance, injunction, or rescission. Specific performance is you actually ask the party that's being sued to do something they didn't have to do in the past, or deliver the goods, or finish the job, or something like that, right? Injunction is when the court tells a party to stop doing something, right? So let's say a business is using another business's name without permission. They're advertising, I'm opening a coffee shop and calling it Starbucks with 2 S's or something. And then Starbucks sues me in court and the courts decide I'm not allowed to use that name and they will put an injunction. They will tell me to stop immediately, right? That's an injunction. Rescission is, that happens sometimes with contracts, you revise things, right? You had a contract and now you have, things didn't work out and you go to rescission and things have to be changed, right? In a civil lawsuit, you have plaintiffs and defendants. Plaintiffs is the party initiating the lawsuit. So in other words, the one suing somebody else. The defendant is the one that has been accused of doing something wrong, right? So the way I remember that plaintiff and defendant, it's like, I always think about, oh, I've been accused of something, I have to defend myself. Right, that's the way how I remember the term, which one is the plaintiff and which one is the defendant, right? But having said that, of course, the defendant will defend themselves, but you know, we do have this thing in this country where you are innocent until proven guilty beyond reasonable doubt. right? What does it mean, proven guilty beyond reasonable doubt? What do you think that actually means? Yes,
There's evidence against it.
there's evidence, there has to be enough evidence against you, right? It can't just be, somebody thinks you did that, or maybe you seem like you're lying in court. There has to be actual evidence, right? Sometimes there are cases, especially criminal cases, where people can still be charged with something called circumstantial evidence, which is not direct but indirect evidence, but it has to be very strong, right? Classification of law, there's substantive and procedural law. Substantive law is the law that describes and creates legal rights and obligations. So these are the actual laws that we have to follow as not citizens, but not technically citizens, but as people that live in a certain country, right? They have to follow that country and that law. Even tourists have to follow the laws, right? If tourists can't go drive in a country and go above the speed limit and say, well, I don't live here, I don't have to follow. So anybody present or dealing or even doing business with that country, even when they're not physically present, has to follow the laws, right? So that's substantive law. Procedural law are the laws that describe how the procedure, how whenever there's a question or there's a lawsuit, how do things go through the court system? We'll talk more about that in chapter 2, procedural law, right? And then civil and criminal law, I briefly talked about that. Civil law is the branch that deals with enforcement of private or public rights. So one party suing another party, it could be a public or private party. You can sue a government entity, you can sue the city for doing something wrong, but it's one party suing another party, where usually crimes can be committed, but they don't have to be crimes. There could be something where somebody just didn't follow the contract as promised, right? Which is not a crime, right? And that's called that's tort law, which we will cover in chapter 3. Criminal law is the branch of law that defines and punishes the wrongful actions committed against the public, where actual laws, criminal laws, were broken, right? You steal something, right? That's a crime. You assault somebody, that's a crime, right? So, and in civil law, you have a plaintiff, the one that sues, and a defendant, that one that's accused. In criminal law, the plaintiff is not really referred to technically as plaintiff anymore, but that is usually who is the one who brings upon the lawsuit in a criminal case. It's stated the people of California versus, and then the defendant's name, right? It's the district attorney of that court system that decides, yes, this is enough, we're going to start a lawsuit against this person or this entity. There's national and international law. National law, obviously, are the laws of a particular nation. International law, there's really no real international law that covers the entire world, but there are treaties and agreements between nations that nations agree to follow, right? So that the relations, that it's more about the relationships with the different nations, and that they promise to follow those laws. Next topic is the amendments. Some of the amendments we're going to cover and that are going to come up in future chapters as well. Freedom of speech. The right to free speech is the basis for our democratic government, right? Free speech also includes symbolic speech. It's not just words, gestures, movements, articles of clothing, and so forth. However you want to express an opinion, right? There are some restrictions. Hate speech is illegal. You can't do hate speech, that can be stopped. And sometimes high schools will restrict articles of clothing because there might be in areas where there are gangs, and gangs wear different colors, right? Because it could pose a security risk to the students. So they can restrict you from wearing certain things while in school, right? The next one is, more on freedom of speech. How's it, there's corporate political speech, the corporations supporting political parties, lobbying and things like that, right? Commercial speech, commercials, advertisements that companies say about themselves or sometimes about others, but you know, one of the things about free speech is, yes, you can say anything you want, but if you say statements that are not true about another party, they can take legal action against you for defamation, for saying something wrong about them. Right? So defamation would be unprotected speech, right? Hate speech is unprotected speech. There's of course always a, since we've had social media, which has been a long time now, right? I think Facebook started in 2006. Before that, we had something called MySpace, but you know, like 18 years old or something, social media. Still, we're still seeing a lot of stuff. So First Amendment and social media, what do you think could be some problems there with the freedom of speech and social media? And we've seen problems. Yes, Marcos. It can get very toxic. Yes. Yes.
The anonymity aspect of it, like you can hide your identity.
You can sometimes hide, sometimes it's difficult to see who actually said that, right, Diego?
Misinformation.
Misinformation. Oh my gosh, all the fake news on social media, everywhere, right? It's a big social problem. Fake news is a big, big social problem. With the political climate we find ourselves in and the fake news online everywhere, it's very dangerous. So, you know, and the toxicity. You know, there have been cases in the Bay Area where, you know, young people bullied each other so much that it caused suicide. There was a 15-year-old girl in Saratoga several years ago who killed herself because she was bullied on social media. And that's not an isolated incident, unfortunately. So that's, you know, you know, even though we have freedom of speech, there are lawsuits against those usually. Oh, here was a case in Bad Frog Brewery versus New York State Liquid Authority, 1998. So there was a beer brand called Bad Frog Brewery, and the label on it was a frog who was showing the middle finger, right? And the liquor authority in New York State said, this is vulgar, this is not good, they shouldn't do this, you know? Children could see that and stuff like that. So they went to court. The outcome was they can continue using the label. You know, they did a lot of, you can read about it in the textbook once you get it. But, you know, first of all, they're not targeting towards children. Beer is for people 21 and over who can handle a middle finger, pretty much, right? So it wasn't, I guess, obscene enough, right? So first, you know, they tried to restrict it, but then the question is, did the state unconstitutionally restrict commercial speech when it prohibited a certain gesture on beer? Yes, they did. That's what the court found, right? So they were able to continue using that label. Freedom of religion. Everybody can exercise their religion of their choosing, right? As long as it doesn't harm anybody. There's no government established religion. We are a secular country. What does it mean to be a secular country? Yes, Justin.
Separation of church and state.
Yes, very good. Separation of church and state. Yeah, we are not a Christian nation. We are not. We are secular, right? Anybody can exercise their religion, right? Free exercise. There's an establishment clause prohibits government from establishing a state-sponsored religion or passing laws that favor one over the other. Right? So states cannot establish laws that favor one religion over another. Sometimes it makes me wonder, and I haven't really looked much into it, when you have states that have predominantly one religion, like Utah, right? And I'm sure they have to be really, really careful not to establish any laws that would favor Mormonism, right? Because that would be against the Constitution. Applicable standards, federal or state laws do not promote or place significant burden on religion that are constitutional, even if they have some impact on religion. Religious displays. Here was another case, interesting case in the textbook about in San Diego, there was, I think it was a veterans, oh yeah, it was a veterans memorial that has a huge cross displayed. Right? And they got sued because, you know, there were non-Christians who died in the war. Right? They don't want to be represented by a certain religion on government property. So a group of people sued them and wanted that cross removed. What do you think? Yes, what do you think, Maya?
I wonder if how people who is alive, it is requesting something named of people who are considered dead. So when the law,
Well, they could be relatives from of the dead. Yes,
I wonder if in their will, if the veterans that died, if they had a will to say, oh, this is how I wish to be buried, so if they have a predetermining like funeral service saying, oh, I wish to be buried or memorialized in another religion, if that goes against that will.
yeah, it would, I'm sure, and I'm sure not all veterans are Christians, right? And if they're not part of that religion, but they're still at that cemetery, but now there's a cross which doesn't represent them, right? Yeah. Is that what you were trying to get at?
Just wondering if it was just like.
I don't know if they do that. I mean, we have a veteran. Do they ask you that when you sign up? If something happens, how do you want to be buried? They don't really, right? So that wouldn't even be yeah. I mean, the point is not, yeah, the point is really, because if it's state property, there should be no cross representing the veterans. That's the point. What do you think? Should they remove that cross or not? Do you think they should? Anybody else? Yes, do you want to?
Yeah, because it doesn't fully represent everybody as a whole.
It doesn't fully represent everybody as a whole, and it goes against, yeah,
Church and state, I mean, it goes against everything.
it goes against separation of church and state. And I don't exactly remember what happened here, honestly. You guys read it up though. It might have been that this was private property, it ended up being, and they could leave it. I don't remember, look it up. But if it's private property, they can leave it. If it's government property, they should take it off, right? All right, quick, okay, I'm running out of time, but we end at 12, right? Patriots Act, you know, you all know, some of you weren't alive, I definitely was. I was pregnant with my son actually when this happened, I remember. But 2011, horrible, devastating moment in recent American history, right? And it's been already, how long? I mean, you know, 22 years.
We're gonna come up with-
Tomorrow, right? No, not tomorrow, on the 11th, sorry, on the 11th, right? Yeah. Terrible terrorist attacks, right? And unfortunately, successful terrorist attacks where so many people died, right? So because of this, Bush implemented something called the US Patriots Act. Does anybody know what that is? Let me just see if, oh, that is the last slide, actually. So let me pull that back up. Does anybody know what the Patriot Act is? Diego?
I'm not exactly sure of the whole thing, but I know it gives certain authorities special authorization to restrict rights if it's in question of national security.
Yes, well said. So if there's a question of national security, it restricts the rights to privacy for its citizens, right? Does anybody else want to add anything? So basically what it says is the government will, it gives government the right to look into, to do surveillance on you, even though you're not a real suspect. There's not a lot of evidence that makes you a suspect of anything. They can snoop in the private affairs of any citizen, right? Essentially, that's what the Patriot Act was, and it was temporarily, and I think they may have extended it. you know, the question is here, do we allow the government to snoop in every single citizen's private affairs in order for them to possibly prevent another terrorist attack like that? Because if they monitor all the traffic, internet, phone, email, everything, they could maybe catch some people planning something bad. Should we give the government the right to do that? In the name of national security? Yes,
I mean, if we're gonna default back to, well, the Constitution, I believe there's an amendment that states that we have a right to privacy, or it's implied at least. So I would think no, even if it's a national security risk, we have a fundamental right to privacy, and we should be able to kind of how, what we say and what we protect it.
so I'll get you in a second. So we do have a right to privacy under the Constitution. And if we give the governor a right, we lose that right. I'm going to stop the recording right now because this is the last slide and we're going to start discussing, but for the online students, they will discuss it on their own online.